Time Lords of Gallifrey, Daleks of Skaro. I serve notice on you all. Too long I have stayed my hand, no more. Today, you leave me no choice. Today, this war will end. No.
The War Doctor is an interesting incarnation in terms of the Doctor's life, because he's the only incarnation that exists to tell one specific story. Every other incarnation comes in and they have 1 season, 2 seasons, hopefully 3 at least, and they have a bunch of different stories. Maybe some of them will lead up to one moment, but the War Doctor is unique because his entire story is really just pushing a button, destroying Daleks and Time Lords alike. And really, that creates a story. That creates the New Who era, with the 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th Doctors all really dealing with the consequences of that action. And that's really good, but the problem is, it sort of undermines the character of the War Doctor. He's the only incarnation I can think of before this one here that is in that position. Like, the Fugitive Doctor exists to tell us, hey, this is what the Doctor did before she became a fugitive. Presumably, that is the last of the the last of the Doctors before she becomes the first Doctor, before she becomes William Hartnell. So, yeah, there's that. I think we really could have only gotten away with one of those. Like, had the Fugitive Doctor come up first, the War Doctor be the one in this sort of weird position, where we're not quite sure what's going on. But I digress. It's interesting to think of how the War Doctor came to be, because before his appearance in The Name of the Doctor, and, of course, Day of the Doctor, it was understood the 8th Doctor, from an expanded universe standpoint, was the one who fought and ended the Time War. Or, at least, he was in the Time War, and the 9th Doctor may have been in the Time War. But it also depends on how you interpret this scene here.
They're never gonna come! Your race is dead! You all burn, all of you. 10 million ships on fire. The entire Dalek race wiped out in 1 second.
You lie!
I watched it happen. I made it happen!
You destroyed us!
So we don't know. Stephen Moffat came in, and apparently, if I remember the story correctly, 50th anniversary was coming up, and the only one he actually has for the 50th anniversary on contract is Jenna. So he's like, okay, alright, I can probably get David and Matt to do something. Alright, so that's 2, that's good. Let's see if we can go for a 3rd. Well, let's see if we can call Christopher Eccleston. What did Chris say?
Hell no, to the no, no, no.
I don't think he was that musical about it, but that's pretty much what he said. And I think we'd have all thought he'd call Paul McGann. We would have all called Paul McGann. But no, he didn't want to do that. He gave Paul a short where he drinks magic warrior juice, but no. The idea seemed to be that Steven saw a bigger problem coming 2 incarnations down the road, which would be the Doctor's going to run out of regenerations. So how do we fix that? Because Deadly Assassin's very clear, you can only do it 12 times. 13 Doctors. So he decided, well, let's make the Meta-Crisis thing an actual regeneration, which I can see the logic for that. The 10th Doctor was shot by a Dalek, fatally wounded, did start to glow. The trick was he used just enough to heal himself, and he redirected everything else to the hand. A bit of a cop-out, but vanity issues, what can you do? And then he's like, well, we need one more. Let's just make another one up. And to be fair, that is a very tempting thing. Like, I don't fault Chris for wanting to do it after Stephen Moffat established the precedent that, hey, time's crazy. It's mostly, you can just add another one if you want. I think this really only worked because it was the 50th anniversary and he got John Hurt. Like, had there been a lesser qualified actor, we'd have all been like, yeah, this doesn't count. Doesn't count. No, this is a Valyard. The Valyard is in the Time War, though, so that's kind of hilarious. And the Time War is that sort of place for this sort of weird stuff because everyone's in the Time War. Alright, Romana's in it, Ace is in it, Leela's in it, Susan, my adorable Seminole, is in it. Alright? The War Master is in it, like Derek Jacobi as the Master is in it, and it's actually brilliant. Like, the Time War itself was always this big nebulous thing we didn't quite know. The closest we ever got to understanding what the Time War was outside of the last great Time War was the 10th Doctor freaking out in the end of time.
But if the time lock's broken, then everything's coming through. Not just the Daleks,
Almost
but the
not
Star
as
of Degradation.
bad, maybe even some
the Horde of
worse
Travesties.
as
The Nightmare
Daleks.
Child. The could have been king with his army of meanwhiles and never word. The war turned into hell.
And this is kind of in line with what we see in expanded materials too, with the idea that the Time War is causing all these damages, all these irreparable changes to continuity. In the Sontaran ordeal, we find out that a planet called Drakis, because the Time War happened near that planet, because a war between the Daleks and the Time Lords happened near there, its history is permanently changed, and they have no idea it's changed. A planet that has spent centuries in peace will now never know peace. They'll be constantly at war with each other, and those people can never leave that planet. There are planets that are totally time locked off, people trapped in horrible loops. There is nothing that can be done about that. At one point, the Time Lords have to be forced to create a time lock around a planet just to stop them from being destroyed. And there's no way to fix it until the Time War is over. And even then, it's debatable. So, there's that. The question is, what is this story about? If you look at it from Day of the Doctor perspective, I think there's two ways to look at it. There's the expanded universe take, and then there's the Day of the Doctor take. And I think it's sort of about the focus you want to make. Day of the Doctor really isn't about the War Doctor. It's about the 11th Doctor. It is his story. It is him coming to terms with what happened in the Time War, which helps set up Time of the Doctor. And the expanded stuff is about the War Doctor. The question is, what is the War Doctor's life about? What is his tenure? Because again, he was created to tell one story. So, well, it's the Time War, so let's make it about the Time War. And that leads to some really lackluster... These stories are very well written. They're very entertaining. I do not regret buying any of the War Doctor audios. They're really great. John Hurt is amazing. Jonathan Carley is great as his... I hate to say successor? Replacement, I think. Stand-in. Well, no, stand-in would imply he's coming back. He does a great job as the War Doctor. He sounds enough like John Hurt to work, especially sound like a younger John Hurt, because he's playing the War Doctor in the early days. So the John Hurt War Doctor audios take place relatively, I would say, to the later half of the Time War, in my opinion, where Carley's War Master takes place pretty much right after the Doctor regenerates into the War Doctor. So you sort of have this take on a character. So there's only 3 takes, but it's important to note that the Time War ultimately does set up the Doctor and his interaction, not just with the rest of the world, but how he views himself, how he views the Daleks. So look at the 9th Doctor, now he views the Daleks, when he first sees them in the story Dalek.
Never gonna come! Your race is dead! You all burn, all of you. 10 million ships on fire. The entire Dalek race wiped out in 1 second.
You lie!
I watched it happen. I made it happen!
You destroyed us!
His admittance of the Time War and his role in it almost seems like an afterthought, like he finally let it slip what he did. And it finally hit him when the Dalek says that. Great, powerful stuff. With the 10th Doctor, you sort of have to put in the perspective that his character is really sort of set on him, in a lot of ways, being the authority. Like, he really does like say, like, hey, the buck stops at me, alright? If I say it's done, it's done. And I really think it does come from the Time War. And if you view war so like a failure to listen, the 10th Doctor, or the Doctor by default, has always been the ones like, hey, we need to do this. No, we can't do that. We gotta do it this way. If we don't do it this way, there'll be bigger problems. And I think by the time of the Time War, seeing what he's had to do, what happened, he's like, you know what? No, we're just not doing that anymore.
I'm so old now. I used to have so much mercy. You get one warning. That was it.
The 10th Doctor doesn't really delve into the Time War, unless someone's about to do something really stupid. And you could say at least there's a sense of hubris to him, a sense of arrogance to him. Like, he sort of views himself as the hero, where the War Doctor and Nine was more sort of warriors. With the 11th Doctor, you sort of have to come to the conclusion that he is very much set on pushing everything back and moving on. Or at least what he thinks is moving on. In reality, he's not dealing with what's happened. He's not really letting himself grieve more because he's tired of it. This also sums up, or really sort of brings home the idea that he is the last incarnation. Which sort of like a weird thing Moffat sort of stumbled into to sort of justify and even make you think that he always knew 11 would be the last incarnation. Because if you look through the 11th Doctor's era, there's a lot of finality to it, which we'll get to when we finally go to the 11th Doctor. But from his perspective, outside of a lot of the rage at the Daleks, one thing he doesn't seem to like is not only change and endings, but he doesn't like to remember. Like, even the moment calls him the man who forgets. And we see that here.
400 years older than me, and in all that time you never even wondered how many there were. You never once counted.
Tell me, what would be the point? 2.47 billion.
You did count.
You forgot. 400 years, is that all it takes? I moved on. Where? Where can you be now that you can forget something like that?
Spoilers. No. For once, I would like to know where I'm going.
No, you really wouldn't.
Like, the 11th Doctor doesn't like to talk about it, doesn't like to discuss it. If you ever thought the Doctor might need therapy because of what he's gone through, this is the story. Like, this is it. The Time War is definitely it. You could argue that the Doctor has PTSD by this point. And then, of course, after that, you go to the 12th Doctor. Now, people would say, well, the 12th Doctor, no, the Time War ends with the 11th Doctor. In essence, it does, but we don't quite see the Doctor really come to terms with it. Like, he's accepted he's going to remember it, but how does he feel about it? And really, I'm just sort of padding this whole scene here because I want to add something else. So the 12th Doctor is in a sort of very new state, a whole new regeneration cycle. 11 was super excited, but now the reality is set in, and as he tells Clara, he's very scared. And he sort of goes through a midlife crisis at this point. But when something like the Time War is about to come back, and you consider what he went through in Day of the Doctor for the Zygons, to see that another war is going to happen between humans and Zygons, he sort of tries everything to get them, to stop doing it, recreating pretty much his position in Day of the Doctor, which is him in a button. And when people say, like, you don't have any idea what we're going through, you don't understand, he sort of lets it all out again, and you realize, yeah, he hasn't let the Time War go. But in this story, he will.
I don't understand. Are you kidding me? Of course I understand. I mean, you call this a war, this funny little thing? This is not a war. I fought in a bigger war than you will ever know. I did worse things than you could ever imagine. And when I close my eyes, I hear more screams than anyone could ever be able to count. And you know what you do with all that pain? Shall I tell you where you put it? You hold it tight till it burns your hand. And you say this: no one else will ever have to live like this. No one else will ever have to feel this pain. Not on my watch.
The 12th Doctor is sort of the one who's trying here to bookend the Time War. So the whole Time War story is supposed to end with 12, in my opinion. And we see this, and really, in my opinion, I think most people think hell-bent when he comes back as sort of who's proclaimed as the man who won the Time War. But the Zygon inversion really sums up exactly where the Doctor's been since the Time War. And it's interesting because in the Time War, if you look at the other Time War materials, Susan's War, the Gallifrey Time War, the War Master, the War Doctor is the only one that's actually about fighting in the Time War. The 8th Doctor doesn't fight the Time War. He doesn't. He just sort of stumbles upon something else going on. But the War Doctor, whether it be Jonathan Carley's War Doctor, who has a story where he's going to assassinate the Dalek Time Controller, or the War Doctor who does at times, although rather reluctantly, help Cardinal Lystra, who is a phenomenal character. Jacqueline Pierce did an amazing job creating a character who I felt was the best and worst of the Time Lords during the Time War. But those stories are really about sort of the horrors of the Time War, as well as the Doctor trying to, not the Doctor, trying to fight in the war, and that's sort of the problem. He's fighting this war, he's not really trying to end it. And I think that's sort of the problem. Like, the Eighth Doctor in Conscription once mentioned that he doesn't know how to approach the subject of a Time War. And because of that, there's no solution he can think of. So it's getting worse. So really what's happening now is the Doctor has to try to put these fires out, try to delay the inevitable, because he can't think of any way to end it. And that does sort of lead to, well, him having to destroy Gallifrey, because he never thought of a real solution. The War Doctor is not designed to end the war. He's designed to fight in it, in that context. So he can't solve anything. Like, he has some ideas. Like, if I destroy the Dalek Time Controller, for example, that's a massive blow to the Daleks. But that's sort of it. And even when the idea of, like, say, peace talks with the Daleks kind of come in, well, play the Winston Churchill clip again.
When will the lesson be learned? When will the lesson be learned? How many more dictators must be wooed, appeased, good God, given him mixed privileges, before we learn? You cannot reason with a tiger when your head is in its mouth!
It should be noted that by the time you get to Day of the Doctor, we see the Doctor sort of hitting, well, I'm sorry, not the Doctor. He's very set on not being called the Doctor. He's sort of very set on trying to figure out if he wants to really use the moment to destroy both Daleks and Time Lords. That's what Day of the Doctor is about. Day of the Doctor is about two characters, the War Doctor and the 11th Doctor. The War Doctor sort of trying to figure out if he can destroy Gallifrey, if he should destroy Gallifrey to wipe out the Daleks, and the 11th Doctor coming to terms with the Time War as well as that War Doctor. And there's something interesting about the 11th Doctor and the War Doctor, especially with the 10th Doctor, because those two, and by default the 9th Doctor, would sort of view that as a very dark part in their history. That's sort of why the 11th Doctor, and presumably every other Doctor, hides the fact that he exists. Like, he's like, no, this is a part of my life. I'm ashamed of this. Is my lowest point. I don't want anyone to know that I did this. And I think we've all been there at some point. There are things we don't like to talk about ourselves that we've done or that we've said. We'd like to just push that away. And of course, as is the name of the Doctor, some old person from your past who doesn't like you wants to dredge it all up, and you got to deal with it. That's it. While the War Doctor is sort of trying to figure out if he can do it, if he should do it, and he sees the man he becomes, or two of the men he becomes, and for a while he doesn't like them. It is very appropriate. I think most people have noticed this, that if you look at the War Doctor and look at every incarnation after that, and we'll focus on 9 to 12, nothing against Jodie, but this isn't her story. All right, the Doctor keeps regenerating to someone younger. All right, so John Hurt regenerates into Christopher Eccleston, a younger person. Eccleston regenerates into Tennant, a younger person. Tennant regenerates into what most people call a 12-year-old. But then, after the Doctor reaches a certain point, as the 11th Doctor reaches that point, in Time of the Doctor, he regenerates into an older body, into the 12th Doctor, Peter Capaldi. And I've always said that the Doctor's running away from his problems. And the fact that, he doesn't really want to look like an adult. He doesn't want to act like a grown-up. Because grown-ups make the hard decisions. And the Doctor doesn't want to do it, because the last time he did, he had to do something like that. And you sort of see that in the 9th Doctor. They're not sort of childishness, but this desire to keep people alive. Alright? I would say it's not that other incarnations didn't care about that. But there's a reason this scene here hits so close to home for the 9th Doctor.
Everybody lives, Rose. Just this once. Everybody lives!
Just this once, everyone gets to be saved. And if you look at the War Doctor, he's very, especially if you read the Day of the Doctor novel. Great novel, by the way, written by Stephen Moffat. As Russell points out, it's almost a different story, but that's because we spent a lot of time in the heads of the War Doctor, the 10th Doctor, the 11th Doctor, even the Curator. But the War Doctor is very meticulous. very calculating. Like when he sees the moment in the form of Bad Wolf looking like Rose Tyler, he sort of basically breaks her down into how she looks. Okay, she's this height, her hair is this color, her eyes are that color, she's wearing these clothes. It's very calculated and a bit detached, which I think is sort of the idea that the War Doctor has really removed himself from the idea of the Doctor. But over the course of the adventure of Day of the Doctor, two things happen for the War Doctor that I really like. One is he realizes that he misses being the Doctor. Like, there's a scene when he's with the 10th and 11th Doctors and Clara, finding out with Queen Elizabeth about what the Zygons are doing. He's like, this is amazing. I'm running through the Tower of London in 1562 with a plucky companion, finding out about a plot by the Zygons to infiltrate the British Empire. I'm like, I've missed this. Like, oh, that's great. And also, you can see this in the special, that seeing the 10th and 11th Doctors bring humans and Zygons to the table talking for peace, that is something none of his previous incarnations would have even thought about, would have even been capable of doing. But they've done it. And it's in part because of the sacrifice made that day. The War Doctor, sort of martyring himself, as he says, great men are forged in fire. It is a privilege of lesser men to light the flame. The next incarnation of the Doctor will be better, and will no longer be put in the position he's in that moment because of the moments that day. And a really great moment that comes across is when the War Doctor's standing in front of the button, and he goes to do it, and the 10th and 11th Doctors come, and they say, it's all right. It's all right, because we were wrong. We were wrong to judge you the way we have. You're wrong to beat yourself up for this, because you're not doing this because it's easy, because you're afraid. You're doing this because there's no other way. There's no other way. And it's easy to be the Doctor when you have all the answers. In a lot of ways, Day of the Doctor, and the novel mentions this too, that we've sort of put him on a pedestal that he would never do this. But then I remembered of this scene here.
Because sometimes, on a good day, if I try very hard, I'm not some old Time Lord who ran away. I'm the Doctor.
And yeah, it makes a lot more sense with that context. I think Moffat realized he probably had to add that context there. The sort of outside universe perspective of the Doctor versus the in-universe perspective of the Doctor, especially from the Doctor. Sort of the same feeling that I get from Batman. Like, Batman doesn't believe his hype, but Bat fans believe his hype. And that's sort of the beauty of it. So the War Doctor is this man who comes to terms with the fact that he has to sacrifice his soul for the betterment of not just time and space, but for the Doctor. And then, of course, the Doctor undermines this by having the Doctors undo this, but whatever. It's Stephen Moffat, all right? He loves to change things that have already been established. But anyway, it's a series about time travel. What did you expect? So what are some good War Doctor stories? Well, I would have to say just go to Big Finish, and here's the thing. I normally wouldn't recommend this, but just consume the entire Time War catalog when it comes to Big Finish, because I think to really understand what's going on that sort of big level, you have to go with the sort of Star Wars approach. Like, the prequel trilogy really makes more sense when you look at it from the expanded materials. And I'm just talking about TCW. TCW is decent at best, but like the now Legends comics and stories really help flesh that out. Gallifrey's Time War, the 8th Doctor Time War, even Susan's War, to an extent, really does help you sort of get a feel of the Time War and what's going on, as well as the War Master. But if you had to stick to just the War Doctor, I think those audios are great. The trick is that with the War Doctor audios, they always sort of have to keep the same sort of status quo, which is this Doctor is always alone, this Doctor was going, I'm not the Doctor! And that can be a bit much. You can sort of feel like kind of the same thing, but there is more being explored as to exactly what sort of hell they're undergoing in the Time War.
And it stirs when
and also selling this sort of idea, as Jorah Mormont once said, Only the Monstrous is, I think, the best one out of all of them. Even though it doesn't have Leela in it like the later ones will do, I think that one sells home exactly what direction the War Doctor's going in. With Jonathan Carley's War Master, you have to understand that's early War Doctor, good lord, and he's sort of trying to still find his feet, trying to find that balance between who he's become and who he used to be. And he's sort of said, like, yeah, I can't ever go back, but maybe there's a way to sort of still keep that bit of spark there. And that's good for a while. That's good. I look forward to seeing what else Carley will do with the role of the War Master, of the War Doctor. Good lord, why do I want to be the War Master? Maybe. That really should have been Day of the Doctor. Think about it. The War Doctor and the War Master going at it, last day of the Time War. Oh, would have been so good. But I would also recommend not just Day of the Doctor, but the Day of the Doctor novel by Stephen Moffat. There's a lot going on. There's a really cool scene there that really emphasized, like, when all the Doctors are together. Stephen took it to another level and truly made it the Day of the Doctor. Loved it. Loved what he did. Get Stephen on Big Finish. Stephen, what else are you doing? You know you've got some more Doctor Who stories in your head. Come on. You can work with the classics. But anyway, with that in mind, this brings the video to close. If you're new to the bug, thank you for like, comment, share, subscribe. Check out some other videos. What did you guys think of the War Doctor? Did you like it? Did you hate it? What do you think of the Time War? Leave your thoughts in the comment section. I'll catch you all later. This is the Bug of Thinking signing off. Thanks for watching. As always, may your fandom serve you well.
Oh, yes. Of course, suppose it makes sense. Wearing a bit thin. I hope the ears are a bit less conspicuous this time.